probably about 3,000, 3,500 errors in parsing through the metadata, which, again, considering 750,000 documents, that's absolutely fabulous. So I'm not saying anything at all against Carl Malamud and his people. But what do we really want as far as a long-term archive of these materials is concerned? We should try and get it all corrected. One of the things I've done is I've, fiddling around with a whole lot of Perl scripts, and quite, obviously noticing that most of the errors tend to occur in eras and tend to occur very uniformly through those eras. And I've got my error rate down to about 2,000 documents, which I made available on our website in an error document that can be downloaded. So that's one thing that needs to be worked on. I think I've done just about all I can with software and tinkering and Perl scripts. And for the last 2,000 documents or so, we need to go through them and actually correct the metadata and get the tags right. What else can be done? As you saw some of the documents that Elmer showed you. And actually, let me just bring one up here while I talk. Put this out of the way. As far as enhancements go, they're very nice documents with a wonderful style sheet. Let's search for something simple. There. I'm also showing off an enhancement order.
Typo there in insurance.
Thank you. So, just so we can see a document. The markup and the style sheets are pretty wonderful, and they look great just the way they are. And quite frankly, I like to leave them the way resources.org originally made them, including their bug at the bottom, because I think they deserve all the credit that we can give them. But beyond that, what else can we do with them? One of the things that I think is very important to do is hypertext linking of all the citations, which is something that I've been working on. And in fact, algorithms that I've used for New Jersey case law that I've been doing for years worked very well with this material. And in fact, the way I do it with the New Jersey materials is it always accesses, it's a database system. So, I mean, as you can see, all of these things are hyperlinks right now. And let's find something we might have. Come on, have a second. There we go. Can anybody see the URL that's below the level of the table here? It links to a CGI script called CaseLink, which fires off a query to a database, which is where I've stuck all of the metadata that I've lifted out of these materials, and it's stuck into a MySQL database, locates the document, gets the file name, and brings it back. Why I think this is important is because it's the same database that gives you any New Jersey case that's hyperlinked in my New Jersey case law collection. It's also the same database that has all of the resources.org Supreme Court cases. It's something that's highly extensible, and anybody can do this any way they want. All we need to do is parse the citations and stick it in the database. And again, anybody can do it any way they want. This is the way we've done it, and it tends to work very smoothly. Although the database with 710,000 documents is a little big. I've got to fiddle around with the indexing, make it a little faster. But it's working, and it's working well. So that's one of the things we've done with enhancements. As you can see, when I did that original search to get this document, I said end court equals third, because the first thing I did when I got all of these documents, I went through the markup and tried to lift out all of the tags that were well marked up in there. And if you look at them, here's what I did with it. The first thing I did was stick it all into a MySQL database so we can access it for any reason we want, or even export it in perhaps OAI format so that people can harvest the material. The next thing I did was stick it into the documents in metatag format. I did that purely for a selfish reason at this point, because we use the swishy search engine, which doesn't really deal that well, at least on our systems, with XML documents, which would have been a better solution just to transform this into XML. It's really good, though, with taking HTML documents and reading well-formatted metatags. So the swishy search engine recognizes cite, docket, decided. It'll do date searching, but it wants a Unix date, so we give it a Unix date. Court, caption. And summary is something that I didn't stick in here, not with this document, but with whatever we can find with the documents, we can put it in as a summary. Something that we can use later, and something I'm going to talk about in a couple of minutes as well. If you look down, farther down in the document, you'll see where I got most of this stuff from. These are tags from resources.org. P-class case site, P-class parties, class court, class docket, class date. You can see that this was a slight bit of a nightmare for a Perl script to lift out accurately, because you need, as Mr. Bruce was saying earlier, a definitive date, which has to be the date that it was decided on. And here we have a string of, as far as this is concerned, nonsense, but also a spurious date and a decided date. And you know that there's at least 10,000 dates that just have two dates list or documents that don't have the decided word there, and a bunch that say submitted but not decided, and a bunch that just have the dates in a different order, and some that have it with the full name of the month, some that have just numbers with dashes between the digits, some with slashes between the digits, and on and on. But we've got most of that taken care of. The only real problems we had was stuff that has extraneous text in it that the original Fastcase software didn't deal with quite correctly, because it was out of the typical order in which the stuff was appearing in the vast majority of the documents. So there were a lot of documents in the raw download from resources.org which were, for example, making the court part of the case citation, putting the party names in it and as the docket tag, some just missing some tags altogether. Again, the error rate was surprisingly low, shockingly low, considering the amount of material, the long time that these materials were accreting from 1950 up to 2007. So they did a great job with it. But there's still a lot of work to be done to make it the highest quality collection that we could possibly make it. And there's still a little bit of work to do with that. Next issue is preservation. Another reason why I stuck in the meta tags, and the way I stuck them in there as meta tags, is because that they're just that much easier for a machine to find and interpret them. And I've reformatted things just to make it shorter and more understandable for any kind of harvester to be able to deal with once they find it. Why not? And also, I want that metadata to stay there, in there with the document, so that someday when I retire and the MySQL databases go the way of all things, and somebody finds this large mass of files for which the directory structure has fallen apart, and they've gotten renamed by some process that I don't even know about, and somebody looks at them and says, what the hell is all this stuff? Why am I not deleting it from my hard drives? They can look at it, and even a machine can put the collection back together for us. Very important to do, needs to be done. Finally, access. I've been putting all this together. I've been tarring up the information of the errors that I've got because it needs to be accessible in as many places as possible. And I think it needs to be spread over as far and wide a number of institutions as possible. If private institutions want to make it commercially available, I think that's fabulous. I think we ought to get together and cooperate, and I could use some help with getting the errors fixed. I'm willing to do whatever I can to make these things work on anybody else's website who would like to also host them. It would be wonderful if we all could own a copy of the Federal Reporter that we don't have, something that we don't have to rent electronic access to from year to year. I don't know about you guys, but we are very seriously considering dropping Lexis for our law students for next year, just because we don't have the money. We're probably going to do it, but this year it's a serious question. No Lexis, just Westlaw.
Can you tell us how much it costs for Lexis and Westlaw without getting into trouble?
I can give you round figures in terms of
Or can somebody shout it out?
the high $20,000.
Well, we're a public institution, so that figure should be accessible through the Oprah statute in New Jersey.
So it's in the $25,000, $20,000, $30,000 range to for law schools to purchase Lexis and Westlaw per year. Is that a fair head kicker? I thought it was higher than that.
Well, it depends on the size of the school.
Yeah, it's around that figure.
Oh, okay. And so now you're thinking just we'll buy one but not the other. Why do we need two?
Yeah. And there are lots of reasons why that's a bad idea, because all of them have, both services have a pretty complete set of case law, statutes, regulations, and law journals. But when you start talking about secondary materials and news materials, there's a wide variety between the two services, and they're both very good for what they have. So we can't afford to drop one of them unless we absolutely have to. But at this point, we're not going to. But as I say, it's a serious issue. So over the long term, the thing that I obsess about and present about every year at this place and wherever people will listen to me is the importance of ownership versus access. We rent all kinds of access to all kinds of material from all kinds of providers, and some of them are really good and some of them are very rapacious, but none of them will give us the material. And as soon as those companies get into any kind of commercial trouble, the material's going away. Hein Online is a great example. Hein is a great company, and they really care about their stuff, but they may get swallowed up tomorrow. And what are the vast majority of law schools going to do about their journal collections as soon as that happens? We're going to be in a lot of trouble because a lot of us are canceling our subscriptions and relying on Hein. I was just talking to somebody working in an Ivy League institution who is talking about the fact that they're not bothering to bind their journals anymore to keep them for long term because even they're relying on Hein Online now. Again, it's a dangerous situation that we're all getting into, but here's a solution right here. Own the material, enhance it, make it a quality product, and then we'll all own it. So where do we go from here? We need to talk about the things that I've been talking about already, such as enhancing, getting rid of the errors, making it better, sharing it, getting people to commit to sharing out some of their disk space to have their own copy of it, and also updating. Resources.org, as Tom said earlier, they did a snapshot, and it's a great snapshot. It's got it's got everything that would stop you from trying to establish your own collection, because it's got all of the older material. And again, as Tom said before, everything current really is online. All of the Federal Reporter, actually the Federal Reporter and what you would call the Federal Appendix, is available online right now from all of the circuit courts, as well as the Supreme Court. But again, scattered all over the place. One of the ways of addressing that problem is something like OAI and aggregating the links. Another way of doing it, and quite frankly my preferred approach to this, is harvesting. And I say that from a librarian's point of view. It's not efficient, and it's a huge replication of effort to whomever will do it, but that's how material gets preserved over the long term. We all have hard drives that will fail, but none of them will fail at the same time or in the same ways. And if we share the material and all of us keep a copy, then the stuff gets preserved and preserved forever. Seeing that the print is going to go away, and we can see it happening now, it's time to do it, and we really ought to. So as far as updating is concerned, I'm going to show you something. This is a really stupid thing to do in a presentation, because it's of course not going to work the way it happened the last 20 times I've done this. But I'm going to try it right now. After I got rid of as many errors as I could from the resources.org stuff, I started really thinking about the updating process. And I started going to all of the circuit courts and working on and looking and staring at their search pages. And of course there are 13 of them, each one with 13 widely different interfaces and ways of doing things, and some of them very protective of their material, but none of them perfectly protective of their material. And one of the nice things and advantageous things is that all of them tended to have a nice results page for their searches, which I love, because that search page will give you a link to the document, along with a date of decision, along with a caption, along with usually a summary, some kind of summary material. Is it a published or unpublished decision? Not that that means much anymore, but they think it's still worth something, so they stick it in. They may say where the district court was, where the case came from, the district court. Sometimes they even have a summary. So these results pages were real nice, and I've made as full use of them as I can. And at this point, I've updated all of the circuit court collection that I got from resources.org. To that, I've added current material from all of the circuit courts from July 2007 to current. And then I went through and wrote a slightly different set of scripts that you see running here now, which is now updating the collection with all of yesterday's cases. And again, it's doing the exact same thing. It's going through and doing a canned query, and when it gets the results back from the canned query, it's parsing through those results, collecting the metadata that I was just talking about, and then grabbing the URL, downloading the document, converting it into HTML, because they're all PDF now, except for the Fifth Circuit, which is insisting still on WordPerfect. So converting it all into HTML, sticking in the metadata just the way it's stuck in the resources.org documents, and then uploading everything into the handy-dandy MySQL database, the same MySQL database with the same metadata. So it's all one collection, even though the documents look different. They are coming in PDF. It's PDF image on, well, it's pretty much PDF text documents. And I hate PDF, and you can't hyperlink them. So after I just made the decision that even though they don't look quite as good, they look pretty good and good enough. So we're dropping the PDFs and just saving the HTMLs. And the script is working, thank God. So it's there. Anybody wants it, you can have it. And you can have a full set of the Federal Reporter from 1950 onwards and have it forever, up to date if you want it. What I want is help with those 2,000 or so documents that have errors in them. And I want somebody to mirror the content so that everybody can have it forever. At this point, I'd like to know, what do you all think? Do you think this is a reasonable approach? Do you think it's something we can all do? Does anybody want to do it? So, bull session commences. Sir.
I was just volunteering. You've duplicated a lot of the same effort that we've gone through to build Outlaw, with crawling the court websites and dealing with the problem of converting PDF files. So clearly, it would be nice if we could share our efforts.
Sure. Absolutely. Albert?
Yeah, I'll take a copy too. Yeah, because I mean that's as you know was mentioned before. That's been a thing with figuring out how to keep everything up to date. Because of course, when I've talked to faculty about stuff, and I've said, well, we've got 710,000 federal cases that you'll be able to use for your courses, and they're like, well, that's fine. I only use state cases. So that that's sort of the I think is also going to be kind of the next step, I think, in terms of this. And so one of the things I have running right now is an actual size calculation of the size of the public resource.org stuff that they released, and then we can see how many DVDs it'll fit on. Or possibly Blu-ray discs. Well, because one of the things, of course, is that like I've downloaded all that stuff a couple of times. It takes a long time to sort of download, and you have to kind of pay attention to it, because if it crashes in the middle or something happens, and you've got to go back. If we could send out, a DVD copy that folks could, load on their network or just stash on a shelf. I know Tom's not so excited about everybody having a copy, and, because he thinks it's kind of redundant. But I actually agree with John on that. I think if everybody has a copy, even if you're just collecting a copy, that's not a bad thing.
Well, that's the librarian versus the computer scientist.
Yeah.
Efficiency versus...
Well, but there's reasonable compromise between those two positions.
Oh, absolutely.
There's an archival function here that I think we have to be quite careful to separate from a developmental function.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you want multiple copies. You want multiple copies in the sort of highest and best state possible. But what you don't want is duplication of effort, 16 different people writing citation parsing scripts that only need to be written once, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I wonder, I mean, and you're most of the way there, right? I mean, if you conceptualize this as a data store plus a toolkit plus whoever knows what, who knows what else, then it seems to me that gets easier to think about.
Yeah. And, as a practical matter, not everybody may be prepared to have their own data store. And so, whoever is not in a position to store the material and mirror it, well, it should be available just as easily.
So I'm thinking that what you might want is a sort of pluggable framework for an archive that is really just a directory structure. And anybody who wants to play syncs their favorite version into that appropriate slot in the framework and keeps their copy. And if they have improvements to offer on that, they let that be known to the community. Teasing at my head here is the idea that someone must have thought this through, or some other discipline. We are not the first people to have to contend with this kind of ambivalent, centralized, not centralized approach.
You'd think. But I haven't seen it.
What the hell were all those librarian data archiving groups doing all these years?
Yeah, well, So?
Sending CDs around to each other.
Yeah.
Receipt them,
Nice
and
for-
got 5 when you need it.
Do
Well,
they
what
shoot
about-
heat, or what?
Well, some of them develop locks.
Yeah, there is locks. I really don't know how much it's used.
Locks is lots of copies, keeps
Things
stuff
safe.
safe, and it's, I've got the page up right here. It's locKKS.org. It's a self-contained software that you run on PC to basically search and archive stuff from journal articles.
And
other
it
web
coordinates
pages.
distributed repositories
Right, yeah.
of similar
Coordinates
material,
distributed repositories.
including error correction between copies in different
Yes.
archives. So, Sarah?
I was just wondering whether we might have something to learn from open source projects where they maintain, from a couple of perspectives. One, this is beautiful, but as you said, you would like for the text to be correctable, or to be corrected.
Or just value added.
Or value added. So I am kind of envisioning something like
LawForge.
LawForge, yeah.
LawForge.
Got that.
Wherein you would have somewhat trusted
Registered.
people have the ability to then go in and make those kinds of corrections, and you would then, I imagine as well, start to develop agendas
Well, that's the CVS
collaboratively
treatment.
about what should be, what's next, what's most important to accomplish. I'm a little sad to see all of the duplication of efforts that's been going on, and I wonder, I remember when public.research.org announced this repository, I was interested to see that, it sounds really good to say this is all public domain, but I was actually a little bit surprised that they didn't put some sort of a share-alike provision into their release of this material, because I felt that it seemed to me that that was sort of encouraging lots of both commercial and non-commercial entities separately pulling down the material, squirreling it away, and making changes and developing the software independently for the purpose of some sort of commercial exploitation individually that they would have. And it seemed to be aimed at collaboration and sort of communally kind of sensible improvement.
Well, at some point, I think it's a natural progression. Stuff comes out, people start messing with it to see what they can do with it, and at some point, the advantage of cooperation and where cooperation is possible starts bubbling up and becoming more and more obvious, and that's the time that cooperation needs to start. And that can happen sooner or later, depending on the project and the community of people concerned about it. At this point, I think now is a good time. I mean, I wanted to, when I got this stuff, that's what I had in mind, actually, and why I wanted to have this session here today, is just for that reason. And so I really wanted to get at least some kind of updating script up there. Maybe not perfect, and this isn't actually perfect. There's lots of room for improvement with these update scripts. But just to show that it's possible. And at this point, I'll be fiddling with these for years every time the circuit court decides to change something. But that's okay, because that's not a whole lot of time. But it's a maintenance issue. And, but at this point, I think I can show that it's possible to have the repositories all over the place and that with a reasonable amount of effort, everybody can participate and make it happen. And at that point, I think it's time that cooperation can actually happen.
Law logs.
Law logs.
Just looking at, sorry, I didn't have my hand up, but I speak anyway.
Actually, there's somebody over here too that.
Oh, I'll defer. Go ahead.
I was just reading further, they have the clocks, which is the community implementation, and these are all aimed mostly at preservation of scholarly publications, but so it's right to go out there and get public information and start archiving it through the same process.
Yeah. I mean, and then also, I mean, one of the problems with cooperation is, I mean, again, what Tom mentioned in the last hour, again, what Tom said and what Elmer said is pretty much what I'm talking about here for the most part. There's huge inherent problems when you're talking about quality control with some kind of massive wiki-like procedure, because everybody will do whatever the hell they want, and it won't necessarily all be for the good in the long run. At the same time, if you try and limit it to a reasonable number of experts, then you've got the problem of nobody volunteering because it's work, and you're not going to get a publication out of it probably, so why bother? But at some point, we just got to eat it and do it. And hopefully, I've made the number of problems small enough so that quality control is a reasonable effort. And it's something that we can, that with a minimal amount of effort, we can all have something really good to show for it. Tom?
I'm going to ask a question that is unintentionally naive. I know it's a naive question, but I hope that the naivete will be somewhat provocative. Tell me why this isn't OCLC.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Why isn't this AALL?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I could...
Well, there's, I can tell you that.
That's an easy one, John.
I'll turn the microphone off and give you a
I
long.
mean, why would you not operate this? I mean, you're absolutely right. There won't be volunteerism, so why would we want volunteers? Why don't we set up a public trust, paid for somehow,
Mozilla.
with effort in terms of replication and contribution compensated by free access?
Well, you already have an organization to some degree, if only the name of it would come to my mind, that the law librarians have set up, and in fact seeded a not-for-profit organization. But I think, again, they're concentrating on text, not textbooks, but on books and other scholarly publications, and not so much on public law.
Well, and this was what stopped, I mean, years ago, no, but 6 or 7.
Oh, let me try to find
They could have proposed this sort of
links.
idea of gathering
LRX.
case law, public case law, to the CALI board and forming a sort of publicresources.org project. And it was stopped by the librarians who said, we're already working on that. Or
Yeah,
they have an
you
organization
know,
that's already doing that.
well, you know, I'll say it with the microphone still turned on. The AALL has a lot of problems with getting something like this organized. There are inherent conflicts of interest, which they will deny to their dying breath, but they're there and they're serious, and it will prevent any serious progress from ever happening through there. And it's just the way it is. And there's also an odd technophobe kind of strain going through AALL still, which prevents these kinds of things from really taking root within that organization. Although it you know, it ought to be. Because I mean, when I think about a project like this, and I think about what's available there, and I think about the kinds of terrors that we librarians have when we think about affording to keep our libraries up to date into the unforeseeable future, you know, it's very daunting. And when I really think about it, and I talk to people about it, they all talk to me about, well, you know, the market is going to make something available to us, and it's, you know, if none of us can afford case law anymore, well, then the market will somehow provide it with us because we represent a demand. And I think about that, and I think what utter nonsense that is in a really, really basic sense. They keep on talking about the market providing solutions to us. And nobody's thinking about who the hell the market is. What's a market? Who's the market? I'm the market. I'm the producer. Anybody can be the market. Anybody is the market. Anybody is the producer, should they just decide to be that. What's the difference between a library and a publishing house in the digital world? Your attitude. Some copyright issues. Well, but you know, it's your attitude. And you can change your attitude in a moment. So change it. And be a producer and a sharer. My dean loves it. My provost loves it too. And I've been able to do all sorts of things on a shoestring with very little interference just because we get lots and lots of hits on the website.
Can you speak to that a little bit more about institutional support, dean, provost, being happy with what you're doing?
They're happy as long as you're not spending a lot of money. He's saving money, doing things cheaply.
Yeah, I mean,
That is basically.
one of my academic interests during my whole career as a librarian has been electronic publishing cheaply. The other really large project I'm doing right now is digitizing congressional documents. Again, out of necessity, we're throwing away our government documents collection. It's being tossed. And I was able to convince the powers that be to throw it away slowly and in stages. And, you know, the Panasonic duplex scanners go for $1,000 a pop, and they're wonderful machines. And we were finally able to break our first one after, I don't know, it's over 4 years old now, I think. And we've been running it. We've got about 1.5 million pages scanned and online, and we're getting very close to being able to do it for a penny a page. And a penny a page with good metadata and archival quality images and a really good fast interface for the material is worth a lot. And at that point, it's something that almost anybody can do. Harvesting documents is something that at a certain point, if the tools are available, anybody can do. And so I'm developing some tools that use a lot of improvement, but they work.
Just to address John's institutional benefit, we currently account for somewhere between 11 and 12% of Cornell's web traffic, which puts us ahead of the library and the computer science department. By the way, that includes physics archive.
Is that a benefit or a detriment?
Yes.
As far as a dean goes, he likes the high profile with the alumni. When the IRS says we're going to use their Title 26, alumni thinks that's very nice. It's a very nice thing. They like the name recognition. The tertiary benefit that's even more interesting, I think, in the long term is that we're starting to open doors for researchers. So that when people go knocking on the door of federal agency X saying we need your cooperation, it's like, oh, you're the guys with the website. Because we use the US code, we use this, we use that. So there's, you know, I think there. On the other hand, I gotta say, running one of these operations inside the American Law School is a very, very, very cool fit. We are a faculty-run institution, run by faculty who have no reason to use the product that we offer.
That's right.
None. Or to believe in public access to it, for that matter, and most of them don't. We are, as I said earlier, preoccupied with statutes and regulations in an institution that is primarily concerned with cases. And more to the point, every time I start talking about the audience for this stuff, I realize that I am in a Brighton institution that is extracting hundreds of thousands of dollars from people who believe that there is a bright line between lawyer and non-lawyer, and are paying the institution to carry them a profit. Well, we are saying no, that line doesn't really exist. There's this spectrum. And I mean, it sounds silly and very philosophical to sort of say that now, but these are abstractions of really of very real phenomena that have to do with core institutional fit. To say that we have been poorly understood for the 15 years that we've operated at Cornell is a real understatement.
Well, you know, it's also an interesting difference, perhaps, between like Cornell and Rutgers.
Mm-hmm.
Since you're not part of the library, there may be issues involved with that. Myself being part of the library, I mean, the way my projects have evolved is just as tenure projects. And I needed to do something really interesting or get fired. And so...
So which is it?
You know, and for me, they didn't fire me. So I made it through that. You know, but over time, the value of what I was doing in terms of web traffic, in terms of enhancing the profile of the institution, at the very least within the state of New Jersey, it worked and was good enough. And, you know, and I published little papers compiling our statistics and talking about what a good thing it is that I'm doing for everyone. And people published those for me. And, you know, so the tenure thing all worked out. But the real point is that as a project from within the library, it's actually fairly well supported, and at this point is really considered a legitimate and core part of the collection. And that's really what it ought to be. I mean, whether it's from a within library project or from without from without the library, it doesn't matter. It's part of the resources that, as librarians, we need to preserve into the, as I say, unforeseeable future. You know, it's my bad joke of my Danish background. It's something that I think about quite a lot. Is, you know, when we're all dead, is this stuff going to survive? Well,
That's a good question.
for me, it's a professionally serious question that really needs to be addressed. And to saying, well, Westlaw's not going away is just not good enough and never will be good enough. You know, we've got the paper, and the paper's good enough because the paper is going to outlive everybody.
As long as there are enough copies of it around.
As long as there are enough copies of that.
Yeah.
The digital files can live well beyond us if there's enough copies of it around.
The formats are readable.
Well, you know, I'm willing to go with ASCII on that. And not PDF, but I'm willing to go with ASCII, or maybe TIFFs.
What I wanted to say, this response to what John and Tom and others were saying, and I finally remember the acronym. The AALL vehicle for this is LIPA, the Legal Information Preservation Alliance, which is undertaking this kind of work. And their first pilot project is the Chesapeake Project. It's a collaborative venture by Georgetown Law, Maryland State Law Library, and Virginia State Law Library. And they're using the capabilities of the OCLC Digital Archive to set up a project for preserving legal information in digital format. And I won't go into all the details, but it's worth looking at and drawing contrast.
Is charging them a lot of money.
No, and I'm certainly not saying we should follow their methodology, but there are clearly people out there considering it, so there's no reason not to get a lot of heads together.
Well, you know, I was invited to speak at LIPA, to a LIPA meeting a couple of years ago, and they were very nice and they were very receptive. Yeah, Carol.
You spoke before me.
Yeah.
How'd that go?
And it went well, but I didn't catch a lot of interest in actually doing this kind of thing. They're willing to raise funds to have other people do it. If doing this kind of thing on a larger and larger scale puts pressure on them to actually produce more, that would be great. But again, there's, at best, I sense in AA, a real strain of hesitancy about actually getting their hands dirty and having to deal with the actual nuts and bolts of digitization, harvesting, preservation, which, you know, if I were a better man, I would dig into it and get involved in LIPA and overcome it. But I would rather just get the stuff out there and available. And if they then look at it and say, okay, this is great, you've done it, we'd like to get involved in it now, I think that would be great. And hopefully they will. But in the meantime, there's a lot of stuff that can be done, and I don't need LIPA for this. So when they're ready,
Who else do you need?
I need a couple of people who will help me go through documents. I don't need anybody to fundraise for me. And
Is this something CALI would be interested in?
That's what, no, well,
No,
the
I
short
need-
answer is, the reason why I'm here is
Maybe.
a repository of material like that is of interest to CALI, not because we want to provide legal research databases or preservation services, but because we think this is fodder for the creation of educational materials.
Sure.
A la Elaine Dell. So, and now Elmer will finish my sentence.
I will. The part, I mean, John's done a really good job of identifying. He mentioned he identified about 3,000 cases that had some sort of parsing error in them. Correct? You've got like that list?
Yeah, well, I've got it actually down to about 200 or so.
Oh, okay. We'll see even better. See, when because I actually recompiled the publicresource.org stuff from their sources, and I just turned off all the error checking and ignored the errors and just recompiled it using their PHP stuff that I modified to add the CALI logo into the footer. and add in the metadata stuff into where it belonged in the XHTML and stuff, because they didn't have it in there. So I sorted all that out. But the thing is that those a lot of the errors are actually, I mean, they're relatively trivial, right? Something got tagged in the wrong spot.
Right.
They're not factual errors or anything. It's a matter of saying, no, this is actually the name of the court, not one of the parties. And so it's like sort of like moving it from like one spot to another in terms of what.
Right. I mean, the way they parsed it, it seemed like for the most part, at least, it was a sequential search. Once you found this, you should expect to see this, and I mean, there are limits as to how good you can do that, because the order wasn't always uniform.
Right. So sort of just with the in terms of the stuff that was released through publicresource.org, the correction of that data is not. I mean, that's actually a doable project.
Yes.
That's very doable, as long as you just sort of like figure out how to parse it out and stuff. And that's Sarah's ideas about LawForge and having just sort of a way to keep track of, here's the list of what needs to be fixed, and then having people sort of check that off is not that, is not that big a deal, as long as people decide to do it. Well,
for the database.
I mean, it could be anything. It could be Bugzilla. It could be the SourceForge software. It could be the Google discussion group. It doesn't.
Well, something like Bugzilla would work quite nicely, because, like as I say, I've identified at this point there's about 200 some odd errors that I know about, because the weird little scripts I wrote to reorder everything didn't work on these. And so those could go up. I mean, I'm sure there's a couple hundred others that just completely slipped by me that are still out there.
Yeah.
And as people discover them, it would be nice to have a reporting mechanism.
Right. And the whole publicresource.org collection, as it sits on one of my servers, weighs in at just a tad over 10 gigabytes. Which easily puts it on 2 double-sided DVDs without any problem. So it's actually within the realm of possibility of being able to say that it wouldn't be that difficult to burn some copies and send them around to people in terms of distributing a copy if people didn't want to take the time to download it. Although it probably wouldn't take that long to download either. But
Torrent.
Or torrent or something like that. Well, they have torrents available. We should mention that if you want to download a copy of the stuff from the public resource from public.resource.org, it's available as just a straight HTTP FTP download, as a BitTorrent download, and as an rsync transfer if you want to do it that way. So they have plenty of ways of sort of getting at that data. And just one more thing, and I'll see before Tom will go. Now I've lost my train of thought. So Tom,
I'll pick it right up.
there you go.
I'm sorry, John. Remind me of your 230 dozen. The nature of the errors is bad metadata tagging or bad linkage or both?
Bad metadata. Yeah, they're available, and the full text engine indexed them quite nicely, and the hypertext links to the citation probably work just fine. Yeah, they'll work just fine. But yeah, the metadata in them, it's a quality control issue.
Yeah, what happened was that John was right about the way, because I've actually been through publicresource.org. They also released, besides the cases, by the way, the PHP scripts that they use to process the cases from the fast case or fast search. Is it fast case? From the fast case source. So I've been in that PHP, and John's right. They were essentially looking for sequential stuff. The way that fast case provides the stuff, the vast majority of stuff had it laid out in a very sequential order. The citation was at the top, and then the parties, and then But of course, not all that's perfect. And
right.
So the errors that you see at this point in time tend to be that somebody put the names of the judges before the parties or something like that, and that caused the sequential thing to just mistag, because that's actually what a lot of it is. It's just simply mistag.
Yeah, it's mistagging, and then and it's pretty simple to then go through and say, for everything that got missed, look here and see if this looks like a docket number instead of a citation, and if you see that, well, then you've got somebody who switched the document with the citation and the docket number switched, and move on. And a lot of the errors got picked up that way, and I could fix them. Sarah?
I'm just thinking, I think I'm finding myself really compelled by the idea that, well, first of all, by the distinction between preservation of things like paper books that are going to be thrown away on the one hand, and preservation as it applies to something that is really going to change. And the reason I'm interested in the change part is that I look at the case corpus from public.resource.org, and I see a lot of things in the text, not the metadata, that seem like they could and frequently should change over time, so that, for instance, in the Supreme Court corpus, they did a lot of markup within the, let's call it, case text that was automated, and that wasn't entirely reliable. The text of the cases themselves is not readily citable in citation formats that are widely accepted, at least not on the practice side, especially given that the paragraph numbering isn't reliable because it was all automated and it's based on these same kinds of assumptions about what starts where.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very good effort, but yeah, it's not perfect at all.
So if, imagining that it's not just the 200 corrections, but imagining that there would be, among the group of libraries that you imagine would be interested in maintaining this and archiving this, a real demand to make some substantial changes over time. What about the infrastructure for how that would happen? I mean, imagine if I called you up and said, I'd like to fix 200 cases worth of metadata, I would pull them down and send them back to you in some way today.
Yeah.
Right? If there were 10,000 cases that needed quality control on them, and you had an army of law students who were ready to spend 15 minutes apiece accomplishing the correction of automated markup, how would that be accomplished?
I'm not sure. It's something that needs to be discussed now, though. You know, I think an open source project model and time could address these things in very interesting ways that, quite frankly, I don't envision at this point. The 200 errors or so, yeah, that's very straightforward, and that's a much more immediate thing, because those errors will make the documents themselves much more accessible very fast. Maybe inserting star pagination would be something that somebody would want to take as a long-term project. That would take a lot of coordination and a lot of time. I mean, that something like that is actually akin to the effort involved in like subject tagging. It's a huge effort, and if we never undertook the project, I think it would still be worth doing. So I'm not sure.
There's an interesting sort of layering and notification problem.
Yeah.
I started thinking right now about how I would solve star pagination tomorrow. I would do precisely what you've done with metadata, in the sense that I would somehow do the best script I could to do it, which would probably consist of some kind of comparison with the existing PDF archives of U.S. reports that are out there for at least the last several years, maybe longer. And then crowdsource anything that I couldn't do by that means. But in the meantime, I'm looking at one semester project for some bunch of software engineering students to go ahead and do the comparison thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But during which time I want to hang a notice on the thing saying, I'm working on this, we're going to get somewhere with it, nobody bother unless you feel like replicating what I'm doing. How do you coordinate all of that stuff? Or coordinate is probably the wrong word. How do you put up a community bulletin board where that stuff is seen?
Well, John's going to give us a place on the CALI website where we can have the law forge. Please?
Sure.
Thank you, John. I think that's the way to go. Should we do that?
Sure.
Should we have a vote right now? I think we have a quorum.
Somebody.
One plug first. We do have a site called lawcommons.org, which was originally intended as the open source development place for alt law. But I'm happy to host any mailing lists, code repositories, things people want to do. And it's there now, running tracks. So there's a wiki, anyone can edit it if anyone's interested in doing that.
Well, that would be great.
Yeah, I vote for more work for Stuart and Elmer.
All in favor?
Acclamation. Now, who's going to protect poor John from the Westlaw hitman?
They know where I live.
You mean you already tried this? Yes, my donuts.
That's right. You're going to send me donuts. With sour cream.
Well, I think we've used up the whole hour.
All right.
Good
There
job,
were
John.
no awkward silences.
Well,
I will speak for them when I bring my lunch up.
What's lunch today, John? Thank you.
Very helpful, Mr. Mayor.
Is there a wiki?
Are you coming too, Paul?
For a little bit. For a little bit.
Should we just call it outlaw?
Oh, well.